Right now, millions of people are asking the same question. What exactly is underneath the White House? I can't answer that. Almost nobody can. But 400 years ago, a shipwrecked sailor claimed he walked through a kingdom on this land, and what he described is stranger than anything in the news. In the last episode, I showed you the maps. World maps from the 1500s that drew cities and kingdoms across America before mass colonization began. One name kept returning: Norumbega. A map from 1597 placed it directly above Virginia at a meeting of three waters, right around the ground where the American capital stands today. Then, over about 100 years, the name faded from the maps completely. But maps are only one kind of evidence. A skeptic can always say the cartographers copied each other's mistakes. So today we look at the other kind: eyewitness accounts. Old books written by serious people describing who was actually walking around on this continent. And then we look at something even harder to argue with: the buildings themselves. Before we start, a sincere thank you to everyone who came back after part 1. Your comments on the maps genuinely shaped this episode. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Ink of the Past. Every single subscription makes a real difference for a channel like this. And one thing I want to say clearly: everything here is the best I've been able to piece together from old maps and old books. If it contradicts what you know, that's completely fine. None of this is the final word. In 1568, an English sailor named David Ingram was shipwrecked on the Gulf of Mexico. He had no ship, no supplies, and no way home. So he did the only thing he could do: he walked. Ingram and two companions are set to be the first Europeans to cross the distance from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Nova Scotia, on foot. Thousands of miles straight through the middle of a continent that, according to the textbooks, held nothing but wilderness. His testimony was written down and preserved, and people have tried to dismiss it as fantasy ever since. There's just one problem with that. Many of the places, plants, and animals Ingram described were confirmed by later travelers. That's why serious readers have never been able to throw the account away completely. So what did he say he saw? He described kings decorated with rubies 6 inches long, carried on chairs of silver and crystal, adorned with precious stones. He saw pearls as common as pebbles, and people weighed down with ornaments of gold and silver. He described the city of Bega, 3/4 of a mile long, with many streets wider than the streets of London, and he said some houses had massive pillars of crystal and silver. Bega, short for Norumbega, the city from the maps described from the inside. The strange thing about Ingram's account is how specific it is. Liars are usually vague. Ingram is not. He named cities: Bama, a rich city 1.5 miles long, where his group stayed a full week; Gunda, a town a bow shot in length; Sagnanathe, almost 1 mile long; and a place called Ochala, a great town 1 mile long. That name may still be on the map today: Ocala in central Florida. And Ocala sits above a gigantic system of underground caverns, much of it unexplored even now. Local legends, and they are only legends, speak of stone idols and stranger things found in the dark down there. He names rulers. The first kings, he says, came from a place called Gizika and called themselves by that name. Researchers have chased that word across the world. There's a town in Poland with almost the same name. In one African language, the word relates to nourishment. Nobody has settled where it came from. It simply doesn't sound like anything that's supposed to be here. He even records their vocabulary. Their word for kingdom was Garricona. Compare that to the English word garrison, a fortified place with buildings and soldiers. Their word for the sun was Keruka. Some independent researchers note it resembles an old Germanic phrase meaning it keeps returning. For the record, that's exactly what the sun does. He describes the people: noblemen and commoners, kings and peasants, olive skin, red skin, white and black, all on one continent. The noblemen wore feathers in their hair. That was how you told a nobleman from a commoner. Sit with that for a moment. According to this account, the feathered people we were taught to see as simple tribes were the nobility, the wealthy class of a kingdom that traded in pearls and wore ruby and crystal. And then there are the animals: sheep, deer, foxes, wolves, horses, but also creatures that should not be in America at all: elephants, giant birds, and one monstrous beast twice the size of a horse, with teeth or horns a foot long, described as a natural enemy of the horse. Details like these are why some tried to write the whole account off as fiction, and yet the checkable details kept checking out. One last thing from Ingram, and it's a dark one. He wrote that wars were fought between the kingdoms over the practice of cannibalism, and that you could recognize that people by their teeth, which he compared to the teeth of dogs. They lived, he said, in the lands between Norumbega and a place called Beriev. Whatever was happening on this continent, it was not empty and it was not quiet. If Ingram were the only voice, you could dismiss him. He is not. An official history of the state of New York, published in 1824 by the historian John Van Ness Yates, describes waves of peoples moving through ancient America. Danes, Finns, and Welshmen fortifying themselves south of Lake Ontario. Tartars traveling by degrees from Alaska toward the southeast. Even Malays pushed into the great caverns of Kentucky and Tennessee, where the book says their bodies, with clothing and ornaments of their own peculiar manufacture, were repeatedly dug up and examined. And one line stands out above all of it. It says these arrivals had to contend with European colonists who were already entrenched and fortified in the country before them. Long and bloody wars, it says, were waged among the tribes. That's not my theory. That's a state history book from 1824, and you can read it yourself. And then there's an 1890 book called Myths and Legends Beyond Our Borders. It places the Norse in America by the year 986, and says that somewhere on the Penobscot may have stood the city of crystal and silver, Norumbega, possibly already there when the Norse arrived. Today, even official history accepts that the Norse reached America centuries before Columbus. Some researchers suggest that admission now gets stretched to explain every anomaly on the continent. In their reading, the Norse were one people of many. There's even a stone tower in New England that carries the name Norumbega. Independent researchers argue it has nothing to do with the city at all. And notice the name itself, recorded in at least 7 forms: Orumbega, Norumbega, Norumbega, Norobega, Arambega, Arambek, Lorumbek. An invention has one author and one spelling. A real place, heard by many ears, collects many names. Now pull back and look at the whole map again. A Spanish royal cartographer, Jerónimo Chiaves, drew the kingdom of La Florida in 1584. It covers what we now call Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Arkansas, and Florida. 2 things jump out. First, the sheer number of cities. Second, their names: Ulibajali, Shuala, Quigata, Shuaquile, X, Nahuatl. These don't sound Spanish. They don't sound English. Some researchers hear echoes of Aztec, even Basque. It's a continent covered in names that fit no colonial story. Even the continent's old Latin label hides a puzzle: America Septentrionalis. Officially, it just means Northern America, from the 7 stars of the Great Northern Constellation. But some native nations trace their ancestry stories to a different cluster of 7 stars, the Pleiades. 2 sets of 7 stars, 1 land. Probably a coincidence. It's still a beautiful one. Which brings us back to where we started, the ground under the Capitol. Look at a photograph of New York in the year 1900. Before trucks, before electric cranes, stone towers and grand facades, block after block, filling the frame. The official story says settlers with horse carriages built all of it, at remarkable speed. That is absolutely possible. Humans are capable of incredible things. But what if some of it was already there? What if certain buildings were not built, but uncovered? It sounds outrageous until you remember this happens elsewhere. It made headlines when archaeologists in China unearthed 6 ancient cities stacked on top of one another, built and rebuilt over 2,000 years. Entire lists exist of major world cities that stand on older ruins. Rome does. Mexico City does. Cities sit on cities. That part is not a theory. That's archaeology. So the question writes itself. Was Washington built on top of Norumbega? There's a photograph from 2003 showing massive excavation directly in front of the Capitol building, trucks hauling earth out of a pit against those white columns. Routine construction, officially. And one article by an independent researcher goes further, claiming that old construction photos suggest the White House itself was raised on the base of an older building. I can't verify that claim, and I won't pretend I can. But remember part 1. A map from 1597 drew a walled city at a meeting of 3 waters, directly above Virginia. And today, at a meeting of 3 waters, directly above Virginia, stands the most famous building in the world, on ground that has been dug, opened, and dug again for over a century. Every source in this episode says the same quiet thing. This land was never empty. The maps drew kingdoms. A walking sailor described their kings. A state history book recorded their wars. If any of that is even half true, then the Capitol was not built at the edge of a wilderness. It was built on top of a story. So I'll leave the question with you. When they dig beneath Washington, what do you think the ground remembers? If this question stays with you, share this video with someone who loves a good mystery, and watch part 1, The Ground Beneath the White House, to see the maps with your own eyes.